this goes back to the lived experience part. If you are not a blind person and you're designing an experience for blind people, there's a lot you don't know about what the needs are. And so you can do a ridiculous amount of research and find out what the needs are, or you can ask, you can ask a few blind people what the basic needs are, and then design from there, and spend your research time doing the refinements to make it delightful rather than doing the basics to make it functional.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Disability is the mother of all invention. That's a direct quote from our guest today, Josh Miele. And he would know all about invention and disability. He has invented, you described, the talking tactile pen, T-Map, and Wear Braille. In his current position as Amazon's principal accessibility developer, he has not slowed down at all. He developed Alexa's show and tell feature, as well as Voice View. Both of these help visually impaired people live independently by using voice-activated technology in the home. This amazing work at Amazon earned him MacArthur Fellowship in 2021. For more information about JOS and Amazon accessibility initiatives, please feel free to visit amazon.com/accessibility. In the meantime, here's our conversation. Well, welcome, Joshua. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so happy to talk to you today.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, congratulations for the MacArthur Fellowship Award. It must be so exciting.
It is very exciting. Yeah, it's an incredible honor. I'm still I'm still getting used to it, and it's an extraordinary sort of life-changing event. So I really thank you for your congratulations.
Yeah. Well, definitely don't get used to it because I think it's really special.
Thank you.
So I thought one of the things that I learned, about your journey, I thought you have really an amazing story, and I'm so inspired on how you overcome challenges that life put you through. And I was wondering if you can give us your background and the journey that takes you to where you are today.
Sure. I mean, you use the word overcome, which is it's a word that has a lot of, history to it. And as a person with a disability, I tend not to use that word just because there's nothing really wrong with it, just because it is, it's such a common trope in disability. I'm blind. And so I haven't really overcome anything. What I've done is grapple with the world that I have and manage it with the tools that are given me and the tools that I'm able to develop myself. So, strategies and approaches and a story is what I have rather than any kind of overcoming of anything. I was born sighted. I became blind when I was 4. And so I've lived my whole life from, preschool on as a blind person. And so one of the most important parts of that journey is a supportive and encouraging environment. And I certainly had that from my family and from many of my teachers and my community. I did not have a lot of blind people around me growing up. So I didn't really grow up with the understanding that I had a disability and that there was a disability community that I could connect with. But I found them when I went to college, and that also was a transformative, extraordinary experience. Not unlike most young people when they go to college, finding their tribe, finding the people that they can connect with. It's a very common thing. Mine happened to be disability and a bunch of blind people who were not only people I could learn from, but people I really loved and respected and thought were funny and cool and a great community to be part of. So it's at that time that I really became comfortable or started becoming more comfortable with my own disability and blindness, and really that's where I think the journey began. But the early part of my life is so important, even though I wasn't kind of aware of my disability identity yet. I was still living it. I still didn't want my disability to define or limit who I was or what I could do. And my family and teachers were all extremely supportive and encouraging me to do pretty much anything I wanted to try, and figuring out how they could help me do that. So, I don't know how, when you say journey, it has taken me all the way up to today. So I could keep talking about, what I've been through and what I've done. But really the most important thing is to not, I feel my most lucky, the pieces I am most lucky to have happened onto are not being limited by myself or by the folks around me to be more optimistic and assume that things are going to work out, rather than being afraid of what might happen if things don't work out, and to go for it. And of course, I have a lot of other privileges besides. I'm male. I'm ostensibly white, and so there are lots of undefinable advantages that I have had, in addition to my encouraging family. And those are just pieces of luck. Those aren't anything that I did to deserve them.
Oh, yeah. I found that the outlook that when you say that, I think it's very contagious. And sometimes people can become less optimistic as they go through hardship. And is this a personality? Do you think that you're more an optimistic person, or do you think this is something that you consciously telling yourself? How is there like a tool that you tell yourself on how to be more optimistic? Because I think it's a better way of living life that way.
It is not a choice. It's just a disposition, I think. I am naturally prone to optimism, and sort of, when I encounter a problem, even if I don't understand how to do the problem, I do the parts of it that I do understand, and then I look at it again to see if it's if I understand it any better. I try to figure out what pieces of it I don't understand and learn about them so that I can address them. And that's sort of how I approach all problems. And I feel like I have been, life is difficult in all sorts of different ways, not just in a disability sense. And so I tend to roll with it a little better than some do. And I feel lucky about that too.
That's great. So you're definitely very passionate about developing technology to serve the blind, but have you always thought about that this is the area that you're interested in doing, or is this something that came about when you were in college?
In growing up, I always wanted to be a scientist. I always wanted to. I've always been fascinated by technology and by machines, and I've always been really interested in space and space exploration and space research. And I studied. I went to UC Berkeley as an undergrad to study physics, and wanted to study physics because I felt like physics is sort of at the root of the sciences that we know. And math is math, of course, is you've got things like chemistry and biology that are basically physics at their hearts. And so I wanted to study physics, and I wanted to become a space scientist and study the solar system and planetary physics, and maybe design spacecraft and stuff like that. And while I was in college, my whole life, I have always needed to figure out how I wanted to do the things I wanted to do. Most of the things that are interesting are untrodden ground, or at least, prior to the internet, like now you can Google anything, right? But when I was young, we had no resource like that. And so a lot of the things, even if blind people had been through them before, were being invented by me and my family for the first time because we were just doing it as it came. So I have always been somebody who just sort of, if I want to do a particular science project, first I would need to figure out how I was going to get access to the materials and the tools. If I wanted to take a math class, I would need to figure out how we were going to transcribe the graphics and communicate about the visuals. So being a blind person, in fact, being a person with a disability, is kind of a constant effort of innovation and creation. I think in many ways, disability drives innovation in so many different ways. And this is sort of at its heart. The people who, we have this aphorism in English that necessity is the mother of invention, and disability is the mother of all necessity. So there's really if you are a person with a disability who does things, you will almost always have to innovate and create ways to do those things. So that was in my blood already coming to college. When I came to college, I loved physics and was, not an extraordinary student, but I enjoyed it. And I got a job while I was an undergrad working at a software company that was designing screen readers for blind people, because just as I had done my whole life in college, I needed to figure out how I was going to do the things that I wanted to do. And one of those things involved using computers. And, consumer level computers were fairly young at that time. This was the late 80s. And screen readers, which are the software tools that blind people use to access the information that computers display. A screen reader, it usually uses text to speech. Sometimes it uses refreshable braille, which is mechanical device that pops dots up and down dynamically depending on what you want to display. It's a computer-driven display device. It's only one line of braille at a time because you've got so many moving parts, but it's a brilliant technology. So screen readers use text-to-speech and braille displays to tell you what's on the screen, and they were young at that time. And computers with graphical interfaces were just coming into the consumer market. Macintosh, it was even before Windows existed. And this small company in Berkeley was the first company to create a screen reader that would work with a graphical computer. It worked with a Mac, and which was extraordinary because a lot of blind people were worried that the advent of graphical computers meant that blind people were going to be locked out of computers forever. But It didn't turn out that way. It turned out that you can create a screen reader, and the company that invented it was right there in Berkeley, and a friend of mine was working there, and he said, "Hey man, come, help us with tech support. You'd be great." And so I got an undergrad, I got a part-time job as an undergrad doing that work. And that's really, I realized at that time that I had a lot more to contribute in the area of accessibility than I probably did in the area of space sciences. Of course, I loved space sciences, but there were, thousands of people that could probably do that kind of creative work. Whereas if I wanted the tools for blind people to be what they should be and could be, they needed to be invented and innovated by a blind person who really understood what the needs were and understood what the tools could do and could create tools that were really meaningful. Otherwise, you're sort of, if you leave sighted people to invent the tools that blind people need, they're gonna miss a lot of key requirements because they're just not blind. They don't know, they're not in it. They don't use the tools. If you don't use the tool, you don't know how to you don't know how to design the tool. And unless you put in a huge amount of, of course it's possible. You can always
do a lot of market research,
a lot of research, but by that time you're going to be, you might as well be a user of the tool anyway. So, so it's a huge advantage to me in designing tools for blind and visually impaired and people with disabilities to be a blind person and to be part of a broad disability community. Not only do I hang out with blind people, but I know, I live in Berkeley, which is the heart of the disability rights movement from the 70s. And there's a strong hangover in Berkeley of that disability rights movement. There's a lot of people around who were active in that movement, a lot of people with disabilities, a lot of people who came to Berkeley because of that history. And it's just, it's an amazing community of people who are deaf, people who use wheelchairs, people who have cognitive and motor impairments of all kinds, and to sort of be steeped in that community gives me a leg up, as it were, on designing universal design. And of course, I don't just design stuff from my own mind and heart. Even though I am blind, even though I am disabled, you have to do research. You have to make sure that the things you're building are going to work for everybody that they're intended for. And that's not just me. That's not a user of, it's not a user population of one. It's a user population of 15% of the entire world has some kind of disability. So it's a lot of you need to be just as careful and scientific in your design of technology when you're blind as you do when you're sighted. But it is you can start from a higher level. You don't need to ask the fundamental questions.
Right.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
Tell us more about, the work that you're doing on the tactile maps. I think as somebody who are not blind, oftentimes we took things for granted. And so like what you're saying, there's certain things we don't think about that could serve to the blind people better. And I thought the tactile map is amazing.
The tactile. So I have always loved maps. Maps are a deep fondness I have. But, you can sum up the problem that I'm trying to solve, or the problem that I keep solving or addressing or trying to solve in different ways, is all about access to information. Access to information is essentially what I do at every, if you scratch the surface of any of my projects, you get to access to information almost immediately. And the maps are a great example of information that blind people did not have ready access to. Maps are a way of representing spatial information in a tactile way, in a way that you can touch. And a lot of the time you'll hear, or I hear people say things like, "Oh, maps are so visual," or graphics, it's so visual. And a lot of the time, what they actually mean is not that it's visual, but that it's spatial, because vision is a powerful spatial percept. Vision is, our most powerful spatial percept as humans. And so we get them conflated. We tangle them up, the issues of visual versus spatial, very often, because we're so accustomed to taking in spatial information visually, but really it's spatial information. And there are other ways to represent and take in that information. So when you create a tactile map, what you're doing is you're creating a spatial representation of a map, but it's one that you can feel. And of course, lots of people have seen relief maps that you can touch and, you can feel where the mountain ranges are. And those are cool. But the maps that I design are not just for kind of coolness, but for actually communicating information about where things are relative to one another. The maps that I've focused on most heavily are street maps and creating technology that automates the creation of tactile street maps. And I did this in early, 2003 or 4 is when I started the Tactile Maps Automated Production Project. It's called TMAP, and it's now a project at the San Francisco Lighthouse where you can order a tactile map of any street, any neighborhood in the world that you want, and they will send it to you in the mail. It's really cool. Or you can even go onto their website and download and print out your own tactile map if you have a Braille embosser.
How many people has been using this TMAP?
Thousands and thousands. It is a very popular service, and there's a long history to blind people and tactile maps. I didn't invent tactile maps by any stretch. I just invented a way to take existing geospatial data for streets and automate that process of turning the street map information into a tactile map with Braille labels that's designed in a meaningful way so that blind people can read it, so that it's legible, so that it makes sense, so that it's tactily salient, all of that stuff. And so that once you learn how to read these maps, you can read any of the maps. One big problem with tactile maps historically has been that every map designer has created their own sort of system, their own code. And so the first thing any blind person has to do when they sit down and look at a map is figure out what the heck the code means. And so there's no standardization or anything like that. So I have created, in a way, I've created a de facto standard by creating a tool that spits out more maps than anybody else can spit out. So my TMaps are now the most prevalent representation of street maps in the world. And so it has become a de facto standard. People don't need to relearn with every new map that they look at. So it's really cool. But maps again are just a great example of spatial information. I'm also obsessed with, charts and graphs and turning those into tactile representations, and also something called sonification, which is a way of using sound to represent data. So, if you have, for example, if you're taking a calculus course and you want to know what a particular curve looks like, a lot of people don't have, they don't have a Braille embosser. They don't have somebody to draw the graph for them and have it be a tactile drawing. So using sound is another great way to turn data into something that can be taken in by a blind person.
Do you have do you have some example on how that works?
Yeah. So for example, you might have a parabola, that uses pitch to represent the graph. And then so you hear it and you use space, stereo space as the x-axis. So the y-axis is pitch, the x-axis is time and space, and so you hear it a high pitch on the left coming down, getting lower and lower. It might cross the x-axis, and I've designed tools so that you hear it tick when it crosses the x-axis, and then it goes down and comes back up, and you hear it disappear into the high frequencies on the right-hand side. So that's a classic sonification scheme for single valued functions. And I actually designed, I used a tool called MATLAB in grad school, which is used by a lot of engineers and scientists for numerical processing and for data visualization. And I came into my lab at grad school and everybody was using MATLAB. And I could program it, but I couldn't see any of the visualization. So one of the first things I did in grad school, again, necessity, disability, and invention, I had to write a set of auditory display tools, sonification tools for MATLAB so that I could do my research. So that's,
yeah. So that's interesting. So it's more like you create technology that can also help you communicate with others and others to communicate with you that you won't be able to see through the sound in a graphic visual way, but it's not really, it's more like spatial way. Like you're saying, it's interesting for me. I never thought about it that way until you mentioned it. So tell me more about your work now at Amazon.
So for 15 or 20 years, I worked in academia. I was a researcher at a nonprofit research institute in San Francisco called the Smith Kettlewell Eye Research Institute. I did the vast majority of my work was done there. All the TMAP work and the video accessibility work. In 2019, I made the choice to move to industry. I came to Amazon to be a principal accessibility researcher in the devices group at Amazon. And really the reason I made the change is because I really love building cool stuff for blind people. And I loved what I could do at Smith Kettlewell, but it wasn't really I wanted my things to reach more people. And so Amazon is an extraordinary, way to have impact. We're all, so many people, including customers with disabilities, are using Amazon services and devices. And so to make an impact on Amazon devices means making an impact in an enormous number of blind people's lives and people with other disabilities. So I came to Amazon to help with the accessibility work on their devices. One of the first things I got involved with when I came to Amazon was the development of their show and tell experience, which is on the Echo devices, Echo Show, and the Echo devices with cameras. And basically, it's a product identifier. Product identification is a thing that has been worked on in many ways, in many places for a long time. In the 90s, people, we were using, you could buy a barcode scanner for $1,200 that would, that you could use on a product. And if you could find the barcode, and if the barcode was in the database, it would tell you what the product was. And so since that time, product identification has been getting sort of better and better and more available, cheaper and cheaper. There are a number of mobile experiences that do product identification, but we really wanted the Alexa devices to be able to tell people what they were, what products they were using. It's very common to have an Echo device on your kitchen counter. And so for a blind person, if there's an Echo device on your kitchen counter, why shouldn't you just be able to hold up a can and say, what am I holding? And have her tell you what that can is. And so, my work on that experience was really, as a researcher, my role is really to help teams at Amazon understand the customer uses and, understand how people are going to use the products that we develop, and to understand sort of what features are necessary, and to do, necessary user testing and design refinements to really make that experience not just something that works, but something that is delightful, something that works really well.
Yeah.
And so there were a number of features that I helped the team understand were necessary, and a number of ways that the product really is one of the best experiences of its kind. For example, rather than having to choose, between product identification and OCR, show and tell does both at the same time. So if you hold up a can and it can recognize exactly what the can is, it goes to its database and it tells you, all about, that can of Progresso soup or whatever. But if it can't recognize exactly what it is, it just tells you some more, it tells you, I recognize the Progresso brand and I see the words chunky chicken on the label. So, it didn't get an exact match maybe, but it got all the information that I might need. And so one of the things that I helped the team understand was you don't need an exact match to build a really cool, useful, very helpful product. They were, when I arrived, they were very worried that they couldn't, that they weren't getting exact matches all the time. And so I was like, no, you don't need to get an exact match. You just need to provide useful information. And so, these are the insights that I help provide.
I've also the practicality of it
exactly, because a lot of the time, when if an engineer or a designer doesn't, this goes back to the lived experience part. If you are not a blind person and you're designing an experience for blind people, there's a lot you don't know about what the needs are. And so you can do a ridiculous amount of research and find out what the needs are, or you can ask, you can ask a few blind people what the basic needs are and then design from there and spend your research time doing the refinements to make it delightful rather than doing the basics to make it functional.
Yeah, that is interesting. It almost sounds like you had a really fun job at Amazon.
I have not been this happy in, this is the happiest I've been professionally for many, many years. There's no shortage of exciting, challenging, interesting problems to work on in accessibility or at Amazon. And, keep in mind that, accessibility is something that it's not just an Amazon problem, it's an everybody problem, right? I mean, we're all, all the big tech companies are working on accessibility to one extent, in one way or another. And we're all making really great progress. And it's a thrill to be able to, make progress at Amazon because there's so many, it's not just, Amazon's not just one thing. Amazon is a lot of things. And so,
they touch on everybody's life now.
Yeah. There's the Alexa experience. There's the shopping experience. There's the devices and, the tablets and the Fire TVs.
Yeah.
That we have screen readers for the Fire TV and for the Fire tablet. So that, that's another part of my, where I contribute. And, there's just, and then one of my deep loves is video accessibility, where I've done a lot of fun work. And, lo and behold, I get to, work with the people in Prime Video who are doing audio description and other accessibility work and advise them on how to make their product delightful for people with disabilities, including blind people.
That's great. So I know we're up on time. Before we end, many of our listeners are engineers, entrepreneurs, innovators. What are the things that you think that you can tell them if they're interested in addressing challenges or technology for the blind people?
There's so much energy out there in the world, and there's so, it's so much fun to invent stuff. It's so much fun to invent stuff. My my encouragement to the folks out there in the world is to, before you go inventing something, find out what the needs are. It's one thing to assume what the needs are, but it's a waste of everybody's time if you invent something that it turns out isn't actually addressing a problem that needs fixing. And a lot of the time, because disability is so widely misunderstood and blindness is so widely misunderstood, it's very common for sighted engineers to sort of jump in and start inventing. So the thing that I would suggest is learn about disability, learn about accessibility. Don't just learn about what the requirements are, learn about why those requirements exist. And the best way to do that is to not study, there are lots of, guidelines and standards out there in the world. Don't study those. Learn about disability itself. Learn about people with disabilities. And from that, you'll see what the needs are and how to invent things. This is something I call accessibility from first principles. Don't study the books, study the people. And the best way I can recommend right now to learn about disability is to watch Crip Camp. It's a great movie on Netflix. It's a documentary about the disability rights movement and some of the people that were instrumental in making that movement happen, and their growing up experience. And it doesn't capture everyone's disability experience, but it's an extraordinary, it's a great investment of 1 hour of your time to learn an enormous amount about disability as it really exists.
Okay. It's called Crip Camp, you said.
Crip Camp, Netflix.
Okay. I should check it out.
Absolutely.
And last question before I let you go is, who's your hero and why?
Oh my goodness. I have a lot of heroes. My greatest heroes are people who imagine things. People who imagine things and share their creations with the world. I'm an avid science fiction reader. I think that science fiction, talking about invention and creativity and necessity, science fiction thinks through a lot of the problems that we are having or that we will have before we get there. And so by being a good science fiction reader, it's a great way to sort of lead the target on technology needs. Ursula K. Le Guin is one of my greatest heroes. She's a fabulous writer. She has an extraordinary imagination, and she is an incredibly generous personality. And she died in the last couple of years, and I still am sad about it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing your passion, your excitement about innovation for blind people. And thank you for your time again.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.